As we are looking at gaining our focus for 2020, I can already tell you there are many things happening in the world, in our community, which are already trying to steal the focus off of Jesus and God in our lives, and I think you see that around you. I want you to secretly record your answers to 5 true or false questions. I want you to kind of keep them in mind. This has to do with Sabbath. People have a lot of different ideas about what Sabbath is, and I want you to just kind of do a self-evaluation. Sabbath is mostly about going to church on Sundays and not working. Sabbath is on Saturday, the 7th day of the week, so we don't really practice Sabbath after Jesus' resurrection other than just taking some time off or going to church. But really, there's no such thing as Sabbath. That's another version. Number 3, Sabbath is optional. Some of the answers to these are not as easy as yes or no. That's part of the trick, right? But Sabbath is only about what is going on between God and my own heart, my spirit of worship. These are all explanations I've seen, and they have varying degrees of probably truthfulness and not truthfulness. Last one. I'm really confused about Sabbath, so I rarely think about it. Throughout the Bible, Sabbath theology is not easy to follow. It is very difficult. You have to really do your theology to follow Sabbath from Genesis all the way to Revelation or till the end of the Bible. And I want to take this week, I'm going to do a different kind of sermon where we're going to trace some of the Sabbath theology through some of its important developments that help us get focused for 2022. I am not saying that I'm going to be exhaustive with Sabbath because I don't want to be exhaustive with Sabbath and be here till next Tuesday. So I want to hit some important theological points. I want to take you through the story of the Bible, and we're going to look at how Sabbath develops in some very important and key ways. So I'm going to be moving fast. I'm going to be summarizing some text, and if I do my job well, you should leave asking questions. You should still have more questions, you should have some ideas about what you want to do, but you should also go, I wonder about this. I wonder what he means about this. I wonder how that works. So we're going to go into a little detail on some of what I'm talking about in the upcoming series on Matthew, but I'm going to introduce to you Sabbath this morning. It's not like a sermon I've probably ever done before, so if you like it, I'm sorry it's probably not going to happen again for a long time, and if you don't like it, don't worry, it's not going to happen again for a long time. So the title of this sermon is simple: Enough. Enough. Here's where it starts. At the beginning. First, God created order out of chaos. He made everything that exists by dividing the waters, bringing light, and all that. And then on the 7th day, He rested. One of the questions I like to ask people at this point is, what did God do on the 8th day? What did God do? Don't yell out an answer. What did God do on the 8th day? I want you to think about it. That question misses the point for a couple of reasons. But first of all, everything God started on creation week, this is going to be boom in your minds for some of you, even starting in Genesis. Everything God started on creation week, including His rest, is perpetual. His rest, in some sense, is perpetual. It goes all the way through the whole Bible, and even Hebrews talks about entering His rest in Hebrews 4, if you want to look that up later. Rest. Now let's get a little bit of what's going on here in Genesis. What is the symbolism? What is the meaning that's going to carry through here? Rest after doing battle with the forces or the chaoses of the sea was a common theme in all ancient Near Eastern religions. It is not unique to the Bible. Whether we want it, we want Bible to be so ultimately unique in every way. It is unique, but it's unique in a very different way that we'll get to in a little bit. But a resting demonstrated that the God was satisfied in the victory of his battle and was resting as a sign of sureness that it was good. In other words, that's why after every little creation, he says, it was good, it was good, it was enough, it was satisfactory. And then he could rest, knowing he had done what he was intending to do. And it's one of those things where, unfortunately for girls, he decided horses were enough and he didn't need to make unicorns. It's over. He's done. He's satisfied with what he's made and he's resting. Not like, we're going to talk about what that doesn't mean in just a few minutes. But here we have, then the story continues. And I'm going to run through this all the way to Exodus really, really fast. Adam and Eve welcomed the serpent, the dragon, chaos, back into the picture, or the devil if you want to use it, until it got so bad, God opened up the floodgates of chaos in the story of Noah, and then he promised never to use that method again. So he had to go about bringing redemption of his people in a different way. And he goes and he finds this man named Abraham, chooses the family of Abraham as vessels to bring order back over creation, redemption to his people. Now, they were then tossed into the chaos of slavery in Egypt until God sent Moses to deliver them through the divided waters of the Red Sea, like it was a birth canal to create a whole new people. It was a new creation of a new people, a whole waters, again divided. It's the exact same imagery. And the moment they get basically on the other side, God says, now you need to start every day practicing Sabbath. They don't even get to we're not even to the 10 Commandments yet. And he's saying, creation has happened. I'm saying that what I've done here is good. Now, he doesn't just say God's going to rest, but because they're a part of what he's doing, he says, you're going to take every seventh day and you're also going to rest. And he institutes what we call Sabbath on the seventh day. Now, again, this is not it is an imitation of first creation, but it's more than that. It's not just simply, the Sabbath is not just simply an imitation that God did it, therefore I'm going to do it too. It is basically God inviting those people into his rest. You get that? You have to get this idea that he's at rest. He is resting after creation. He rests. He invites us into his sovereignty, into his sufficiency, into all that he has done. He goes, you're a part of what I'm doing. You're going to rest. Now, all creation is sort of invited that in the Psalms, but we won't go there. That's in time, another place. Why does he invite them in? Why does he invite us? Why did he invite Israel into his Sabbath? Sabbath reminds us of his sovereignty. It's very, very important, his sufficient sovereignty. I read the story of several Israelites trying to gather manna on the seventh day and miraculously failing. I say miraculously failing. Have you ever failed miraculously? I mean, by divine inspiration, they fail. I think there's times in our life that it might be best if I had failed. You know what I mean? He's causing them to fail in this miraculous way. As they came out of the breadbasket of Egypt and they go into the wilderness, they can hardly imagine that there could, even though God is dropping manna out of the sky, they can hardly imagine that there is enough. It's not something that's in their heads. They've had to work 7 days a week. They've had to put everything into slavery in Egypt, this great bread basket of the world, and they think they have to imagine the only way that you can ever have enough is to never stop working, never stop seeking, never stop looking for what you're trying to do. So in Sabbath, God is training their hearts and minds to say, enough already. As humans, we have a hard time believing that there is enough supply. We are upset about a supply problem right now because we have lived in the breadbasket of the world, where we've constantly had enough, and in a time where anything can be on your doorstep in a couple of days, when grocery stores, especially before 2 years ago, were almost always utterly filled to the rafters. We have a hard time. We imagine that the only way that can happen, the only way we could ever have enough, is to never stop working. And if we stop working, somebody else is going to get ahead of us, and then we're going to get out of the loop, and we're not going to have enough. What happens when a community acts like there's not going to be enough? That's not hard for us to imagine anymore, is it? On the little details, panic, chaos, we introduce chaos back in. Not having enough is best friends with chaos. Think of toilet paper 2 years ago. You might say a minor thing, but for us it's a pretty major, for us, because we're pretty spoiled, that's a major thing, and we panic and we complain and we're upset and we're angry, and then we want to make sure that we're getting us and we're getting ours, and we're all hoarding things to ourselves. When we hoard, when we fear and want, Sabbath as a community, when we practice Sabbath together, it stops that. Sabbath says we have enough with the blessed work of God because we have all we need in Him, and He is enough. And that includes each other. That includes helping each other. It's not all dropping His manna out of heaven. Well, it's simply. I have a question for you. I want you to think about your actual daily, weekly life. That is what God offers enough for you? Or do you feel like you constantly have to and must scrounge, panic, hoard? We are stuck in a world of more, more, more. One famous pastor said, "We strive for more, even when more is not as good as less." More has become a sort of disease in our lives. Family, friends, work, governments, and even times our own churches, they will use you up, and they will demand more if you offer it to them because they hoard in fear. I want you to catch this. If you catch nothing else in the sermon, catch this, because I have to say this to people all the time. In a world of not enough, if you live in that world where there's not enough, the least demanding and most loving people in your life will get the worst part of you because you have given your best to the demands of those who will never be satisfied with your work. They will constantly demand more and more and more of you until you're giving them all you have, and those are not the people who love you and care for you and guide you. A few years ago, a pastor asked his youth for preaching themes. He just said, "You know what, I'm going to go to the youth and the children, ask for preaching themes." And the overwhelming answer was, "Preach this. I want my parents to spend more quality time with me." That was the number one given answer. And it wasn't multiple choice, it was fill in the blank. If you're constantly living in a world where you fear that you're never going to keep up, that's never going to be enough, you're probably giving to people to whom it will never be enough no matter how much you give. They'll take as much as you offer, and you'll get the people you love will get the worst part of you. Who are you giving the best part of yourself to? Is it your family? Is it God? Who are you giving the best part of yourself to? Do you need to draw some boundaries in your life that say, "I have enough"? If God isn't enough, then the one who loves you the absolute most will be the most neglected in your life. But Sabbath pushes us to invest in who we love and who loves us. Sabbath, even in this early time, was an urge to remind, they stay at home, be where you're supposed to be at this time, worship the Lord, make sure that you're spending high quality time with those whom you love, because in God there is enough. That's why he commanded it. It's not some rule that comes down from you to make you have one more thing to do because, well, everybody wants a little piece of your time. He loves you. And he wants to make sure you're spending your life with quality, and your quality part, your best time with those who you love and the one who loves you. I want to reframe that for you. Because sometimes going to church or going to Bible study or setting aside special time with God at home, like all kinds of ways we can Sabbath, all those ways are ways that we participate in that love of God. Now, I want to warp drive. If you like Star Trek, let's warp drive. I'm going to summarize very quickly some things to get to the next understanding that I think is very important in understanding Sabbath and enough. Sabbath and sacrifice. Those two go hand in hand. They're important aspects of one another. I will, again, not exhaust the topic of either Sabbath or sacrifice here. I want to show you in some ways they come together. But first, you need to understand, a sin, especially defined in the Bible and more particularly in the Old Testament, sinning is to side against God and ally with chaos. It is to take part in the enemy's work. It is to work in a way that is against his order, against creation, against how he created you. And entering back into God's rest, let's say you've sinned and you want to enter back into God's rest, and his sovereignty and power requires a sacrifice to demonstrate that God is indeed enough. There's other ways we can talk about sacrifice, but one of the things it does, it says God is enough. I'm going to make a sacrifice of something I have to show and demonstrate that you're enough to me, Lord. For Israel, this happened very naturally, first in the tabernacle as they were in the wilderness and moving, and then in some other places, but finally, ultimately, in the temple. Judah and Israel, which was a split of Israel after King David and King Solomon, ended up descending into chaos of false worship, and because God was not enough for them, mistreatment of others follows. There's never enough. That's what happens. And finally, God said, what? That's enough. Enough already. I'm going to let you drink the full cup of sin and chaos. I'm going to let you have it all. You want to not worship me? You want to worship other gods? You want to try to hoard your life by seeking anything you can? Fine, I'll let you have that. And then he allowed the Babylonians to come. Well, first the Assyrians, then the Babylonians to come, conquer them, and take Judah into exile. And Judah is spending all this time in exile, and life ain't going good. I mean, it's going really bad. There's slaves. It's a dark, dark time. And people start to ask questions. Where are you, God? God must not care. He must not be so powerful. You know what? He was probably resting so much that he fell asleep. It's actually a phrasing from Psalms and from what we're about to read. Loved ones are dying. Their lives are feeling meaningful. And even though they're looking everywhere for more meaning, they feel powerless and hopeless. Isaiah records this in just this manner. You can look at several Psalms, but I want to look at Isaiah. Isaiah 51, 9 through 11. Now, I'll tell you this. Isaiah is actually a very difficult read. You probably know that if you've read through the Bible. And one of the things that's very difficult is actually knowing who's speaking. Because it doesn't say, so-and-so says, and then God replies. So what I want to do for you today is in Isaiah 51, 9 through 11, it is Israel, it's Isaiah, it's vocalizing Israel's cry out to God. And then in a moment, we're going to look at God's response. So we're going to start in Isaiah 51, 9 through 11. This is Israel talking to the Lord. And I'm going to kind of translate this for you, or interpret this for you as we go, okay? It'll be easier that way than going back. Here they say, "Awake, awake, put on strength, O arm of the Lord." It means, Lord, wake up. Wake up, Lord. We need some help. Awake as in the days of old, the generations of long ago. Lord, please do what you used to do. Was it not you who cut Rahab in pieces? I remember, Lord, when you were just and you practiced justice, when he sends out the pieces to call up his people. Who pierced the dragon? That's the victory of chaos and creation. Was it not you who dried up the sea, the waters of the great deep? That's the Genesis creation. Who made the depths of the sea a pathway for the redeemed to cross over? That's the Exodus creation. That's the parallel ideas and events there. All signs of his sovereignty. So the ransomed of the Lord will return and come with joyful shouting to Zion. And everlasting joy will be on their heads. They will obtain gladness and joy, and sorrow and sighing will flee away. This is basically, if you just wake up, Jesus, our God, if you just wake up, we'd all be okay. Quit sleeping. We need you. We're in desperate need of you, God. Please wake up. Don't you know it's still chaotic out here? Don't you know evil is trampling your people? Do you want to hear God's answer? Do you want to hear God's answer to this? I'll start it and I will summarize it with you. And I want you to go home and read 51, this section, all the way through 53, because it's really rich. I'm going to give you the lowdown here. Verse 12. This is God speaking. Even I, am he who comforts you. Basically, I'm still the God of Sabbath rest, and I'm right here. Who are you that you are afraid of a man who dies? Talking about the kings of Babylon. And the son of a man who is made like grass, a mere mortal. Are you really afraid of a mere mortal? That's what he's saying. Do you fear them more than you fear me? Don't imagine for a second I'm not in charge just because I'm resting or I'm here. Because you're not living the life you want. Don't imagine I'm not still in charge. Woo. Now here it gets big. He goes on to promise that the exile is nearly over. And he will again deliver them from the chaos of their oppressors. But he doesn't let them off easy. Read verse 17 with me. Arouse yourself. Rouse yourself. Arise, O Jerusalem, you who have drunk from the Lord's hand the cup of his anger, the chalice of reeling you have drained to the dregs. Here's the interpretation. You're the one who needs to wake up, not me. Yes, you have drank fully from the cup of chaos, and you got so totally wasted that you've been laid out, decked on the floor, taking on all the garbage of life. You've been eating out of the junk pile. You've been doing all of these things. It's you that's been asleep and not me. You're the reason your life has gone this direction and this way. It's not my fault. It's not the reason I'm absent in your life. It's because you've been living in chaos and sin, not because I don't love and care about you. What an incredible moment as we see our world asking these same questions when every tragedy hits. Oh, where is God? There must not be a God because he doesn't answer these things. Oh, I hear people ask questions like, what is the meaning of life? And I'm going, it's not a profound question. We have a much more profound answer in the Bible. It answers those questions. It's not that he's asleep. It's that we're asleep. He is totally in charge. He goes on to say, much like he did with Noah, I'm not going to let this happen to you again. You're not going to go through this kind of judgment again. You are my people, and I want the world to see my glory through you. But what's to keep this from happening again? Because he promises this is not, you just keep reading Isaiah, you'll see it. What's going to keep this from happening again? Because we're human. We keep having a problem with not feeling like there's enough. And then we mistreat people, and then back into sin, back into some sense of exile, back into drinking the judgment cup. What is to keep this from happening? All over and over again. Do you see that the problem is there needs to be a perpetual, ultimate sacrifice to maintain our ability to rest with Him despite sin? Do you see that? If He's going to keep His promise that says, I'm going to never ban you again from my presence, and sacrifice is the way that we are restored into His presence, we're going to need a perpetual way of sacrifice, a perpetual way of being restored to Him. And so He begins to tell the story and the price of restoration. What's it going to cost? How's it going to be paid? And that's when you get to the Isaiah chapter 53. And I think there's nothing that catches it better than Isaiah 53, 4 through 6. Go read the whole thing after church. I'd love for you to do that. But he says this, surely our griefs He Himself bore, and our sorrows He carried. Yet we ourselves esteemed Him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. But He was pierced through for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The chastening for our well-being fell upon Him, and by His scourging we are healed. All of us are like sheep who have gone astray. Each of us has turned to his own way, but the Lord has caused the iniquity of us all to fall on Him. He's going to pay this price. We know Jesus is God. He's going to pay this price Himself so that we may perpetually practice Sabbath, so that we can perpetually be in His presence, so that we can be restored to Him. He solves this problem. Jesus is enough. A great irony, I think, of Jesus' life is that one of the major reasons the Pharisees wanted to kill Jesus is because He wasn't following their particular rules on how they thought that Sabbath rest needed to happen. You can read that in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I mean, he gets in trouble over Sabbath about more than anything. One of my favorite stories comes in Mark chapter 2. Jesus' disciples walk by some fields on Sabbath, and they plucked heads of grain to eat. And the Pharisees, they go into a tizzy and they object. But Jesus reminds them that David's men did basically something similar with holy bread. And then Jesus says this in Mark chapter 2, 27 through 28. So if you want to read the whole story, you know where it is. Mark chapter 2, 27 through 28. But here's what He summarizes it. Jesus says, the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. It's a perplexing statement in some ways. Especially if you grew up where Sabbath is this really legalistic thing. Jesus is saying that Sabbath is not like other pagan holidays and religious rites. Because the aim of every other religious cultic activity was understood that the gods created men in order that on the feast days, on Sabbath days, when they were resting, the priests and slaves of God had to do their bidding. They had to try to appease their gods. You see that? All the other gods in the ancient world, when you threw a big party, it was a big religious festival. Now you see that on TV, right? We reenact those things, and everybody's jolly, and they're happy, and they're having this great big party, and it's the awesomest thing on the earth. But in the ancient world, throwing a religious celebration was nerve-wracking, because you never know quite sure if you had appeased that God, whether you had given enough, whether you had done enough to please Him. And Jesus is saying, no. God's not like that. The real, true, awesome God, Jesus' Father and Jesus Himself, they're not like that. Jesus says Sabbath has always been about enjoying the fruit of what God has done and in doing in our lives. He is the provider and you are the receiver. Sabbath is about Him being the provider. He is the one who is sufficient, and we worship and we take part and we glorify and we enjoy that sufficiency. That is Sabbath. That's the gospel. He is the one who provides the salvation. That's the good news. Salvation comes by what God does, not by what we do. The gospel is right in Sabbath. It's right mixed into that. In fact, it's the basis of it. All we have to do is accept the invitation to join Him and rest in Him. You know, Jesus goes and He enters in, later in His life obviously, enters into the ultimate expression of chaos, death itself, in which He is this ultimate sacrifice Isaiah was pointing to. That sacrifice opens the door of full restoration, a new life for those who rest in Him. You see, that is why we traditionally worship on Sunday instead of Saturday. People have asked me that lots of times. Because we publicly proclaim that Jesus is enough. He is sufficient. He is the one who brings us rest. Hebrews 4 lays it out a little more fully if you ever want to read that. Paul says, though, we have to remember in Romans 12, and again, you can write that down, I'm just doing a summary. Romans 12, that one day is like another, but be convinced of this in your own mind. If you want to do it the other way, that's fine, but be convinced of your mind. He takes it out of the realm of legalism. But he doesn't say don't Sabbath. Because when he says one day is like another, what does he mean? He doesn't mean there's no Sabbath. What do you think he means? Every day, all time is a time that you can rest in Him. Now, there may be, because we're humans, I think personally, we still need time. In fact, there's other places you can go. We need times and spaces set apart in our lives where we make sure that we are practicing God is enough. And so, as we've been talking the last 2 weeks ago, I preached that I want you to make sure you're taking time in prayer, in contemplative prayer. Well, that takes what? Time. And God made time, but you got to make time again. You got to make time for Him. Also with hospitality. Hospitality takes time, and it takes resources, and it takes effort. And hospitality is another way of saying God is enough. So if you struggle with one of those two, you can reframe this whole concept as God is enough. I will do what I can. I will ask Him for what I need to make time, make space, make resources in my life for this. So it's not just coming here on Sunday and worshiping, although that is an important aspect, and we can talk about why at some point. It's an important aspect of Sabbath. It's all the things that you do that say, I'm going to minister for the Lord because I know He has enough resources for me in my life and my family's life. So when we fail to do some sort of resting in Jesus, it isn't that we're breaking some law so we can please God. You know, my very first Sunday, I'm going to tell a quick story. My very first day working as a minister was a Wednesday. And there was a wreck that day, and it was chaotic beforehand. Like I had to go take care of a wreck. And I thought, well, Sunday came around and go, man, it can't be as crazy as my first day on Wednesday. So I get to Sunday school, and I walk into Sunday school class, and there is it's not too much to say, a world-renowned author, writer, who's in the Sunday school class, and was before me, taking interim pastor there. And one of the couples who might normally come couldn't make it. And I was really surprised. I don't want to go into all the reasons why, but he was a little to my left or way over. And he starts yelling that doesn't he know that he better be here if the Lord's going to bless him. That's a commandment. And he started getting on. I was like, what? And he started yelling at me. Don't you know the Sabbath is one of the 10 commandments and you better do it or else? And I was taken aback, of course, and trying to figure out. So I was like, all right. But what I finally figured out over time and in reflection was this was less about law. This was not about who he was. This was pain. This was pain that the church and churches were diminishing and people weren't coming. And he thought they just needed to follow the law. They just needed to follow the rules. And if everybody followed the rules, then everything would be okay. Now, here's the thing I think you've discovered over the years. So is Sabbath a law? Yes and no. No, it's not anymore. It's not a legalism anyway. And I'll tell you why. God is not a vending machine. There is a deep pain in legalism that pretends reverence, but it just treats him like a vending machine. It says, if I give God these things, if I come on Sunday, if I do this stuff, then I better get this stuff back. I better have his assurance. I better have salvation. I better have all of this stuff. That's not what coming to church is. That's not what worshiping is. That's not what any of that is. Because guess what? If you come to church, a legalist comes to church, and they're putting all their effort, they're putting all their work into that vending machine, and God knows that heart is not there. When they don't get what they want, what are they going to do? Have you ever put money into a vending machine, and it doesn't give you what you want? You're like, poof, poof. If you've been to a church where there's a lot of legalists, I hope you've not. We all deal with it ourselves. And you've been pounded and you've been beaten, it's because the vending machine doesn't work that way. God's not a vending machine. And when we get pain and we get upset that people aren't here or watching or they're not doing what they need to do in life, it's not going to do any good to pound on this. Because what we're about is teaching and loving people in a way God loves so that they love God. That they want to be a part of his rest. They want to take part in what he's offering. They want to give themselves over. Come and be a part of the one who has given himself to you. So when you fail to do some sort of resting in Jesus, it isn't that we're just breaking some laws to please God. It is when we come to church, when we're in public together in some Sabbath way, it doesn't have to be Sunday morning, it is a public confession that when we fail to come to church or we fail to do community, Sabbath, it is a public confession that we do not need or appreciate God's provision, which includes his people. That's a big statement. And it's one that I had to wrestle with. Is God and his provisions for your life enough for you? It's not about just coming together. I don't want to make it all about Sunday morning services. Are you finding ways to say what God is given and done enough and sufficient? I want you to say enough already to those who demand all your attention and time. Enough already to your ambitions, to which take every second try to get ahead of the game. I want you to say enough already. To every design of control of your life where you're just trying to get ahead, enough already. What I want you to do is go to God this morning in your heart and say, I'm ready for enough in you. I'm ready to experience enough in Jesus Christ. I want you to take that with you in your heart this week. As the different pulls on your time and your energy and your strength pull you away from the text, that pull you away from hospitality, that pull you away from your discipleship. You have to work. You have to do lots of things. But are you making sure that God is the source of it all by saying enough? I want you to pray with that this morning. Most gracious Heavenly Father, we come to you this morning.